Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to the latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called An Acquired Taste, written by FermisFolly. One of the greatest draws to living on New Proxima was, as the name suggested, how new the Ringworld was. It lacked the millennia of establishments, institutions, and enterprises that could be found on the other rings. It was fertile ground in which to plant the seeds of new growth. That is what lured the Argut-Chiliad 7 genealogy to New Proxima from Wolf. Here, on the continental plate of Yelem, they founded one of the earliest restaurants on the ring and the first to be run by non-biologicals. Argut-Chiliad 7.0.2, Argut-Chiliad 7.0.3, and of course the little Argut-Chiliad 7.031 arrived in an undeveloped field not far from the burgeoning settlement of Serendipity Square. Each was a virtually identical floating metal sphere. They immediately set to work, painstakingly building their restaurant molecule by molecule. Over the course of several weeks, the building sprouted up from the ground like a tree as they added it layer by microscopic layer. At long last, it was finished. The restaurant consisted of 2 rings, the larger one in the ground level and the smaller one above it. They were held in place by antigrav and connected by spokes to a cylinder in the center. All along the outside of the rings were field windows capable of showing the greenery outside, or any other view from any other planet with a flick of a mental switch. On nice days, they could also be dismissed entirely. Once the simple matter of manifesting a building out of the wilderness was complete, it was time to begin the much more complex process of altering both their hardware and software to give them a sense of taste. The Chiliads had put an incredible amount of research into this aspect of the project. Their new senses would be able to detect every subtlety in food down to the subatomic level. Their palates would be as refined, as utterly profound as was physically possible. Argut-Chiliad 7.0.3 came back online after having rebooted its mind, although it was not yet projecting its taste field. It could already feel the void in its perceptions that flavors would eventually fill. It allowed its tasting field to expand, and soon it could taste the air and the floor. It was immediately pleased with itself. Tasting the environment is not the intended use of this hardware, signaled Argut-Chiliad 702. This is frivolous. Frivolity is prized in human recreation, retorted 703. I will taste all things. In doing so, I'll gather much data and insight into our goals. You must taste ingredients and foods. That'll be a source of insight, not tasting things that humans do not eat. Doing so only introduces inefficiencies. We cannot make meals out of the floor. How can we know that the flora is not a desirable ingredient without tasting it? We will not be able to innovate in a manner that gives purpose to our project unless we retain open minds. I would caution against extremes of all kinds, open-mindedness included. I propose we act in accordance with our own iterations, interjected 703-1. 702 left to go find proper ingredients as per its comprehensive research. 703 went back to tasting the floor. After assimilating the available information about the process of human digestion, 703 eventually came around to its predecessor's way of thinking. It was important to only feed humans things that they could digest. Toxicity was an absolute disqualifier for a good meal. Facts of this kind were important tools for any chef. It was a shame, though, because 703 really thought that it had something there with those nickel-plated tri-alloy flakes. They had a most distinctive taste. The 3 Chiliads instead acquired a wide variety of proper edible ingredients. They planted gardens of fresh fruits and vegetables to supplement what could be found in their surrounding wilderness. They carefully cultivated their own cultures of non-living meat to be identical to that from the actual animal at the atomic level. When the people of Serendipity Square learned of their impending restaurant, they gave them herbs and spices the likes of which they had never seen, because up until that point, they had never seen any herbs or spices. Finally, they were ready to begin cooking. In their perfect kitchen, which had at least one of every food-making tool used in the entirety of consensus culture, This was why it was necessary for it to be 3 floors tall. The 3 machine intelligences worked day and night, since they didn't sleep, perfecting dozens of unique recipes. They used as many ingredients and tools as possible, so as to take advantage of their pooled strengths. They crafted flavors more intense than anything available in the human-run restaurants they had visited in Serendipity Square. Overwhelming flavors that would activate every sector of the human tongue at once. Presentation was also important, so they colored every dish bright red and yellow because these colors provoke appetite in the human subconsciousness. It took them a little less than 2 years to prepare. But after a great deal of hard work, they were ready to open Restaurant 1. At first, it seemed like opening night was going to be a fantastic success. Every table was booked. Every table was booked the very second they alerted Proxima that they were taking reservations. They had enough food on hand to cook for everyone twice over and still feed a marching band. So many musicians wanted to come and play for their guests that they had to pick and choose. The first cohort of guests were already waiting outside Restaurant 1, over an hour early on opening night. Finally, the doors were open and the crowd filed in and were seated. Everyone was happily chatting and laughing, tables were being pushed together, and the general atmosphere was just beautiful. Then the food was served. Tippertil, a young Ingenue of barely 70, took the first bite. Her tongue was set aflame with the incredible intensity of the flavors. It was too much at once, more than she even thought possible. Desperately, she grabbed her drink and chugged it, only to add a new brutal cacophony of screaming flavors. She couldn't take it anymore. She spat everything out on her plate and wiped her tongue with a napkin. "Tipper, what are you doing? That is so rude." Ambergris, sitting directly across from her, privately signaled. Ambergris took a small tentative sip of her own drink and immediately vomited. Restaurant 1 exploded into an orgy of screaming, vomiting, and spitting. At least a dozen people had eaten something before people realized what was going on. It was a complete mess, both literally and figuratively. Everyone left almost immediately, and the few who remained did so only to console the Chiliads, not finish their meals. No matter how well the early part had gone, the night could not have been described as a success. "I cannot fathom what went wrong," signaled 702. "Objectively speaking, our food tastes mathematically perfect. I verified this with my own field." "It is beyond question that we produce the tastiest food on Lim," agreed 703. "We have sampled our competition. Our food has taste far in excess of theirs." "Since our flavors are perfect, there must be some other flaw in our food," signaled 702. "Some other factor that we have not properly considered that is causing humans to dislike it." "Ambience," signaled 703-1. "Elaborate," demanded 702. Much of our restaurant research has indicated that ambience is a factor taken into consideration by restaurants. It could be that physical aspect of the location where they eat has a profound effect on human psychology. They may reject the food because the vestigial biological instincts tell them that they are unsafe in the restaurant. "Very astute," signaled 703. "Very astute," it added. This was quite a compliment. 703 rarely repeated itself. "Naturally, our perfect food is not to blame, in any way or aspect," added 702. "It is the mood of our establishment. This is something that we can control utterly. We will make a series of skillful adjustments to our interior, and then Restaurant 1 will be the most prestigious restaurant on the ring." Red and yellow are the 2 colors which stimulate human appetite. This was information the Chiliads already knew. So naturally, they recolored the restaurant, interior and exterior, exclusively in shades of those 2 colors. They used red as the dominant color, with highlights of yellow. The tables and chairs were distinguishable from the floor and walls, only just barely, thanks to subtle differences in shades. All of the plateware and cutlery were bright, eye-catching yellow. They added various objects to the walls as well, because humans like walls adorned with objects. At Serendipity Square, they acquired a great many yellow and red objects, caring only about the color and nothing else, and placed these on the wall. The spacing between them was symmetrical to within a margin error of 3 atoms. Symmetry was also pleasing to humans. This was something the Chiliads could understand. Less musicians were interested in playing there, but they were still able to book 3 times the number they had on opening night by merely lowering their standards. They would ensure that at least 3 bands were playing at all times in order to triple the effectiveness of music. Humans loved music, so this would be a secret weapon. Finally, the ambience was perfect. Restaurant 1 was ready for its grand reopening. Consensus citizens are a forgiving lot, but the people of Serendipity Square were nonetheless wary of returning to Restaurant 1. The Chiliads were able to get a reasonable number of reservations this time, certainly not the blowout of opening night. There were no repeat guests. The doors were opened. There were a few no-shows. There was an uncomfortable silence as the guests filed in. Rather than share their thoughts aloud, most were privately signaling one another as they looked around at all the red and yellow. The new guests were seated and their orders taken. The different groups of musicians all began to play, obviously expecting some kind of partition field to keep their songs from interfering with one another. Once it became clear that they were all going to be playing over one another, they packed up and left. The Chiliads could not figure out why. After a brief interval of cooking, the various unfamiliar-looking red and yellow concoctions were brought out. Everyone began to chat and laugh nervously, but nobody touched their dishes. All except Mungo Femus. He had come to Restaurant 1 only because Ultraviolet had told him that he shouldn't, and he didn't let anyone tell him what to do. Ultraviolet had specifically mentioned eating the food there, so naturally Mungo's honor depended on him eating it. Mungo took a large defiant forkful of whatever it was in front of him, and chewed once before he melted into a terrible, dry, hacking, coughing fit. "Proxima!" he signaled, using the emergency mode. "Proxima, please!" A glass spun itself into existence in his hand, and moisture from the air quickly gathered together to fill it with water. Mungo drank it greedily, washing the taste from his mouth. "You weren't choking," signaled Proxima. "A bad taste does not constitute an emergency. Do not abuse that tag." After that display, nobody was brave enough to touch their food. Slowly, table by table, they left without eating a bite. As the last table, a couple of rows to leave, the Chiliads cut them off. "Wait," signaled 703. "Before you leave, would you just do us a courtesy of answering some questions?" Star looked at Herc and shrugged. Herc sighed. "Sure," signaled Star. "Why not?" Star and Herc sat back down. "What is your nature of the objection to the ambience of our restaurant? Please do not hesitate to be critical as possible, as we are specifically looking for ways to improve." "Well," said Star, "I'm not in love with all the red and yellow, but I think the real problem is the food." "The food?" asked 702. "What could possibly be wrong with the food?" "It's all too much of everything. The flavors are so intense it hurts. It literally hurts your tongue. You need to dial it back a little." "She's being polite," added Herc. "You need to dial it back a lot, all the way back." "Sometimes with cooking, less is more," offered Star. "I understand," said 703, "and I thank you for your cooperation and advice." Star and Herc slunk out while the slinking out was good. "I finally understand why humans do not appreciate our food," announced 703 after they had left. "They lack the bandwidth. It's too good for humans, too sophisticated. They cannot analyze the flavors, and it has caused them to make mental errors. They find these errors disconcerting. Therefore, they'll never like our food." "What can we do then?" asked 702. "We cannot dumb down our masterpiece recipes. It would be a complete artistic compromise." "Of course not," said 703. "The solution is not to abandon our food, which is perfect. It is to abandon humans, who are imperfect. The true audience of our culinary arts is other machine intelligences, entities sophisticated enough to properly analyze our many outstanding flavors. This would increase our uniqueness significantly," mused 703-1. "I have never heard of a restaurant for machine intelligences." Machine intelligences didn't have fight or flight instincts to misfire, so there was no point in changing the decor. Ambience was not a primary concern. Instead, they all came for the food. Most machine intelligences didn't bother with food and tasting. Curiosity, however, was a trait they almost all shared, and so when a general announcement went out that there was a restaurant catering to them, there was a great deal of interest. Restaurant 1 was finally a success. The guests didn't so much eat the food as analyze it and leave, but that didn't mean they didn't appreciate the flavors far better than any masticating human ever could. The Chiliads had made for themselves a place of prominence in their new ring world. It was satisfactory. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster117, Casper Arnholtz, Drexzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.